Well, welcome everyone to our next episode of Crossroads. This is a casual conversation with friends and pastors where we explore the intersection and the confrontation of our faith as Christians with the culture of this world. My name is Michael John. I'm the pastor of the Market Street Baptist Church. And with me, our panelists at the far end, as usual, Rick Harrington, pastor of the First Baptist Church in Haverhill.
Good to be here again.
And in the middle of us here is our good friend Lierte Soares. Now, he's going to say a few words. He's the new pastor at the New Life Community Church in Georgetown. And Lierte, welcome, and just maybe say a few words about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit.
Well, Michael, I'm very happy to be here with you and Rick and coming to the North Shore. It's a great blessing, especially, I came originally from Brazil. Almost 10 years serving, the church here in the United States, especially in New England. After pastoring in Vermont for 7 years and also being a blessing to the Metro West part of Boston, serving and planting a church there. Now coming over here, it's just a great joy. I came through the North American Mission Board, and I'm here to serve and love people.
Great. Great to have you.
Yes.
Looking forward to hearing your perspective on everything, too. All right, well, today is a very special edition of Crossroads. This is our Christmas edition. We are recording this today is Thursday, December 22nd. However, I am told this will not be aired until after Christmas. However, there are, as you know, 12 days of Christmas, so we should be covered. This technically works still. And if it doesn't, it may be to prepare us for next year as well. Well, Christmas is a wonderful and happy time of year for many people. However, it is not without controversy, especially among Christians who take their faith seriously. So on this episode of Crossroads, we will be wrestling with a few of the controversial Christmas questions that people have, especially Christian people have, as we want to take our faith seriously and biblically and be faithful to the Lord. And what are some of these things? So there are these questions that Christians of sincere faith and goodwill have very different convictions on and very strong convictions on. And so we're going to wade into them a little bit, and we may find some disagreements on the board here as well. We'll see how things go. Are you ready to get into trouble, men?
Yes.
All right.
Come on.
So our topic number one today is a question that I'm hearing a little bit more lately, is should Christians celebrate Christmas at all? And so I want you to hear this. I'm going to read this quote to you. This is in 1659, Massachusetts law. This was on the law books in 1659, put in there by our Puritan forefathers. And it says this, quote, "For preventing disorders arising in several places within this jurisdiction, by reason of some still observing such festivals as were superstitiously kept in other countries, to the great dishonor of God and offense of others, it is therefore ordered by this court and the authority thereof that whosoever shall be found observing any such day as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, or any other way upon such accountance as aforesaid, every person so offending shall pay of every such offense 5 shillings as a fine to the county." That was in the law books. So if I'm getting this straight, our Puritan forefather, it was not the Grinch who was ruling the county of Massachusetts. These were the Puritans, devout Christians, very devout Christians, banned the celebration of Christmas and charged people 5 shillings for every offense if they were caught feasting or not working or doing anything Christmassy during that time. So, we have great respect for the Puritans here. I mean, Rick?
Definitely.
Right?
Oh, yes.
I think
yeah.
Lierte,
Not perfect, but
Yes,
they're amazing.
indeed.
All
But
right.
I think the Grinch deserves some apologies.
Okay, all right. I'm going to start with you, Lierte. Did our Puritan forefathers have a point that we should seriously consider today? Should Christians participate in Christmas activities and feasts that are never commanded in Scripture and seem increasingly superstitious and secular and even godless? What do you think?
It's interesting because you got to see the motivation of people's heart. And of course, they were very serious with scriptures, with their lifestyle. But the thing about not celebrating Christmas, that's an extreme, okay? we know that Christmas got a lot of the involvement of some pagan heritage to the celebration of Christmas. But a balance is always welcome when you approach Scripture, and especially when a Christian. But back in those days, they were extremes. There were some extremes that they took. I really, if you know something that is really anti-Scripture, it's not the Bible. I mean, I don't encourage people to do. However, the way that they did in the past, it's not like it's not okay for us to do the same. We need to put some standards that the culture today is a little bit different. And I think that Christmas is a time of opportunity, especially in a culture that is a culture of cancellation. Mm-hmm. And even though that we have roots in paganism, and I understand why they put those laws there, and we can discuss this about the roots of paganism and Christmas itself. However, in today's world, we got to take the advantage that we can in order to manifest the message of Christ. Okay. That's my point of view.
Mm-hmm. All right, Rick, I want to follow up with this. Maybe you can answer Lierte's, my follow-up to Lierte here is this balance idea. But what fellowship does light have with darkness? If this is a pagan holiday, if there are roots in paganism, as some are claiming here, mm-hmm. why should we have anything to do with it? How do you find balance with that?
Yeah, well, maybe a good way to start is just take a minute to say, what is...
You're not the Grinch.
That's not the Grinch, that's right. Well, I mean, what is Christmas?
Yes.
Christmas is the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ, mm-hmm. the center of the Christian faith. And not just the birth as if he's just a great man that lived that we really respect, but that he is God in the flesh. Okay. That he is, this is God with us. God broke through time and space and history, entered into our actual world, was born of a virgin in Bethlehem. That's what Christmas is commemorating. It's what we as Christians recognize Christmas to be all about. So, and of course, the Puritans would 100% celebrate the birth of Christ and celebrate the incarnation mm-hmm. as an event, even if they didn't celebrate Christmas as a holiday. Okay. They would. I mean, their faith would be very gospel-centered and centered around the reality of Christ entering our world and ultimately going to the cross and the resurrection. Their concern, I think, was probably in many ways to separate themselves from Rome in what they would call Romish doctrines, mm-hmm. Roman Catholicism and High Church Anglicanism, and the danger of making Christianity into merely a religious observance of holidays and holy days and things like that. And they would be very, very careful and trying to avoid a connection particularly with Roman Catholicism. So that would be part of their motivation, I think, as Puritans. Another question, though, is where did Christmas come from, and what are the connections with paganism? And so I don't know how much time you want to spend on that, Michael, but there certainly are. There's a tradition of where a lot of the aspects of Christmas and where they come from. Yeah. But I don't think that because pagans did something, it therefore becomes wrong or evil or sinful for all people at all times for the rest of the...
So are you saying this is not as pagan as people are saying it is?
I think it is in some sense what you make of it. If you are, for Christmas, you are worshiping God and celebrating the birth of His mm-hmm. Son, it's a glorious thing to do. And that, I think, still is, in most people's minds, the origin of Christmas. It's about the birth of Christ. Yeah. So I think that certainly can be just a wonderful expression of worship. For others, it could certainly be no more than a time to be with family or a time to give
just a holiday.
Holiday.
Yeah. Just a holiday.
It's the day you get in the black, from the red to the black in your business. It's a consumer holiday, and so it's definitely like a lot of things. It's what you make of it.
All right, back to you, Lierte. The follow-up.
Well, one of the things that it depends on the perspective, like what Rick just said about the roots with the Roman Catholicism. Mm-hmm. In South America, for years and years, the Protestant didn't really celebrate Christmas the way that the culture celebrates right now. Mm. The symbols, because they were really rooted in the South American theological practices through the link with paganism and the Roman Catholics. Now, when they come over here, And it's interesting how people are. And I'm not criticizing the Puritans, because I think that God used them in such a great way. However, imagine this. I mean, Christmas, not only today, but in the past, is such a great message and opportunity to tell the story. Imagine winter without Christmas. It's cold and dark. It's the same as a life without Christ. And I think for every Christian, it doesn't matter which season of the year or holiday, you are the gospel messenger to redeem any culture. And I think that even though that we have the pagan roots, but as Christians and Jesus' disciples, we can redeem the culture just telling the story. And I think that that's the central part that a lot of Christians, and now just going back to South America again, where the charismatic movement, now this is the year 2000s, has grown and taking most of the Christians in South America, they are Christians, charismatic or Pentecostals, they don't celebrate Christmas, and they say it's a curse. But that's wrong in the sense of the extremes, being just extreme to that kind of point of view, you're losing an opportunity to tell people the story. And I think that is, I mean, I know that Christmas is not the Super Bowl of our faith. I think that Easter is our Super Bowl, let's put it this way. But in today's culture, which is the holiday that has a louder voice? I think Christmas is that moment that you bring everybody together. There's a peace movement. I mean, you study the history of wars. Even in wars, when it came Christmas, there was a peace treaty in the made of. I mean, don't tell me that it's a pagan thing. I really believe that this is a God moment for us to express our faith.
I'm going to come back to the pagan thing, Rick. Maybe you know a little bit more history.
Are we really pagans here?
Well, I want to, because I hear this all the time. It's like that Christmas is this pagan roots and pagan. But is it? Is it really? I've just because things happen at similar times of year doesn't mean that they come from the same thing.
That's right.
Do you know? I mean, a little bit. I know, for example, like the Christmas tree is not a pagan thing. That was
the Germans.
Germans. Martin Luther was one of the first who brought it into the home. Very specific reasons. Represented. It was taken from the Passion plays where it was represented the tree of life, and now you have the tree of life being cut down, being brought into your home. Powerful symbol of the gospel, the Christmas story. Santa Claus is from St. Nicholas. We're going to get to him in a second. That's a Christian. That's not a pagan person. We have a lot of this mythology and silliness with elves and fairies and things like that. But talk to me. How pagan is it really?
Again, I think it all depends on what people are making of it. So, you watch a lot of Christmas movies, for example, and the mention of Christ or the birth of Christ is completely left out. So it's all about the story of maybe the origin of Santa Claus or something like that, and it becomes not the actual origin of Santa Claus, but some mythical origin. So it becomes its own thing, and those aren't necessarily bad. We'll get to that, like you said, but they're not really primarily about the birth of Christ. I think that to give the Puritans a little bit of credit here, what they're worried about is that people's faith will be based on merely tradition, just going through the act of worshiping, going to church on these days, engaging in certain sacraments, and then that's it. And as if that's the whole of their faith, that sort of sacramentalism or that sort of high holy day. And I think that's a danger. It's a genuine danger for us today. The pagan roots, I think, again, it all depends on if you went to the average American today and you said, what is Christmas really all about? What's that holiday all about? I think most would still say it's about the birth of Christ. I think that most people would still recognize that as the origin of Christmas.
One of the things just about paganism, if you take in that perspective, has a pagan root. Just visiting Israel a few years ago, and they had just found out Magdala, and they were, this was before John the Baptist. Some homes of wealthy people, they had like baptistries there of purification rituals. And I'm not talking about the one in Israel, but if you go to Jordan, there's a bunch of places that people would get purified. So could we say that the baptism of people also has pagan roots? No. It depends on the perspective. And like I said, The gospel has power to redeem any culture.
Yeah.
You cannot look to things with the origin of the roots because, look, there's nothing new under the sun. Maybe someone got a tradition like that. Okay, bring it to this. We all live in a world that we connect things and connect traditions.
Yeah.
So having that perspective, it's all full pagan, that's wrong.
That's a good word. You know,
Okay.
I think there's a fallacy of that. If just because things are similar doesn't mean that they come from one another or that they influence each other.
It's a matter of the heart and what is the perspective of the person.
All right, so we're going to settle this question right now, right at this table here. I want you to give your, just in a sentence or two, your final answer to this question. Should Christians celebrate Christmas? Go.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly.
With ho, ho, ho.
All right, I'm gonna add a little caveat to that. I would say, I believe that I think Christians should follow their conscience on this, because we do have folks. There are some folks in our church who do not celebrate Christmas as a matter of personal conviction, and I'm like, follow your conviction. Do not, but don't judge, and don't condemn anyone else, and we should not look down upon them, but follow your convictions. If you celebrate Christmas, celebrate it to the glory of Christ. If you choose not to celebrate it, don't celebrate it to the glory of Christ. That seem fair?
And don't criticize people
And
that do or people that
absolutely.
don't. I mean,
Absolutely.
because they will fall into
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah, we are.
And that's not a godly thing.
Yeah, we
That's
are.
right.
All right, now let's get to I think the topic that is on more people's minds than that is topic number 2 about Santa Claus. So, the question is, what should Christian parents tell their children about Santa Claus? Santa Claus, as you know, is the omnipresent spirit of Christmas in America. Pretty much every store, every home, almost every movie and TV special has some reference to him. And every child, whether he wants to or not, will be exposed to this story endlessly. And will probably become obsessed with the whole concept of a secret giver of toys and granter of wishes. I mean, who wouldn't? So the question is this: what should Christian parents, we're not talking about American parents, but Christian parents who love the Lord, who love the Word, what should they tell their children about Santa? And then we'll start there, and then later on I'm going to ask you a more personal question: is how did you handle this with your children? So with that one, I'm going to start with Rick.
Okay. Well, I think you can certainly talk about the historical Santa Claus from the Dutch Santa, saint, and Claus being the short for Nicholas. So Saint Nicholas was an actual person. He was a bishop in the 4th century, and he was a generous person who gave gifts. In fact, he gave to particularly these 2 very poor young girls, saving them from a life of poverty and some believe even a life of prostitution. He gives them coins that actually really rescues them and saves their life. He was a passionate Christian and advocate for sound doctrine, and really lived. So certainly that's a great story to tell your kids about the story of Saint Nicholas. Just recently, his crypt was found in Turkey, and above it were these murals of frescoes of Christ. So what a powerful picture of the risen Christ standing above even the grave of Saint Nicholas. Now, as far as, I know that doesn't really answer the question of what do you do with the actual, the mythology that surrounds it. I think when kids are really young, so I think I took a stricter role before, but I take a little less now. And that is, kids use their imagination. And as long as they understand it's kind of in that world of imagination, you know, if your 14-year-old still believes in Santa Claus, you probably need to revisit that, right? But if
You
you're a
need
little
some
kid,
therapy.
Yeah, I mean, but little kids tend to believe in imaginary siblings, and they tend to believe in giants and dragons, and if you engage it on that level, I think it can be just a healthy use of imagination. And there'll be certainly a time in which I think you'll have a conversation more clearly about how this works.
So should parents put gifts under the tree that say "from Santa"?
So again, I would go back to that same idea, and I wouldn't necessarily say they should, but I'm also not necessarily saying it's wrong for them to do it at a particularly young age where they're just sort of invoking imagination for young kids.
Okay.
I think that's okay. I think you certainly want to. You mentioned the issue of conscience when it comes to celebrating Christmas.
Yeah.
I think if someone felt conscientiously that they were lying and deceiving their kids, and not just kind of playing into imaginations, then they should be honest with them.
Okay.
But I would leave it to the parent to kind of decide that over their kids.
Okay.
So.
All right, Lierte, so Rick's all in on Santa Claus. And how do you feel about this?
Well, it's interesting. I just had a conversation with my boy this morning, and I started, talking about the story of the real Santa, that he was a generous Christian. And it's interesting because they found out, where he's buried.
Yes.
And that's awesome because you could Google that and they say, no, this is just a story. It's just a myth. And it's not a myth. This guy was a saint. He was a real Christian. He really paid the ultimate price with his beliefs.
Yeah.
He got in trouble because of his faith. But I think truth doesn't hurt. And I really don't believe today, in today's world, the kids will really buy Santa as we did when we were kids, okay? Kids nowadays, I'm from a time that I believe when I watch TV that people lived inside of that little box. And come on, the kids nowadays, that's the industry of product of the culture, the entertainment culture, but I really believe that truth doesn't hurt. Mm-hmm. Of course, the use of imagination is pedagogical, it's healthy, but you gotta have a conversation. I mean, because he can tell kids at his school and they can make fun of him. Mm-hmm. And you create another problem. I think that every father or mother, every parent should act according to what they have inside of their home. The problem about lying about Santa, that's something that you can open an opportunity, for kind of lose a kind of trust in their parents. Why did you lie to me? Yeah. That's something that I think every parent should bring into consideration. When is the time? But creating an illusion, because you have superstitious attitudes some people had. Like when I was a kid, they said, if you put an old shoe under your bed on Christmas Eve, in the morning Santa will put the gift there. Because in Brazil, we didn't have, the chimneys and, Santa could not come. So I think the truth will never hurt. And I think it's an opportunity to tell the real story, the real Santa, that we need to rescue the value of our faith in this season of the year.
That's great. Now, that is a concern I've heard, too, of people who have literally said when they realized that their parents had deceived them about Santa Claus, and the Tooth Fairies, and Easter Bunny, and these kind of things, that they just put Jesus in that category with them. And they just said, well, he's a myth too. That this is some even referred to it the crucifixion, emphasizing the fiction part of it. That this is a mythology. This is all mythology. Is that a concern? And then I have one more follow-up question with that too. So, I don't know for Rick or Lierte, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with both you guys that, and that's why I would say you gotta really think through as a parent. And I'd kind of leave it to the parent to kind of think through this for what's best for their kids. And if they had my advice, I'd certainly talk to them about it. When is it a wise idea to tell them that this is a fantasy, this is an imagination, right? It brings out the joy of this time and generosity, but there's not a real. I think there's a time to have that conversation, and I wouldn't wait too long because if your kid is at a certain age and you're still trying to convince them and they're kind of against their own natural reason trying to believe this, they're going to think, yeah, you're deceiving me. Again, when they really come to the truth. So I think when they're very young and their imaginations are just used to being full of all these different types of things. That's one thing. Once they come to a certain level of reason, and that's going to be different for different kids and different parents, I think. So,
well, one of the things that I see in all this thing is the amount of strength that the culture has this time of the year. You're dealing with a powerful tool that is Christmas. Christmas is huge. It's huge. I mean, it is the time that changes everything. People change their schedule because of their Christmas. Wars have give a pause mode because of Christmas. And kids, that's the thing. It's like, and then you have the commercial part. But going back to the truth, one of the things that I was taught, to believe in Santa, and coming from a different background, that I had my toys on Christmas, but I came from a world that not every kid had their toy. And then why Santa doesn't like me? You know, it's like, why did Santa forget me? And then you have those TV shows. You remember those days that you should write a letter to Santa? How many millions kids wrote letters to Santa and never got an answer back or not even a gift? So the culture is really evil, and you got to know how to manage this. But I always go to this. It's an opportunity for every Christian to share the story and to evangelize your kids. Don't miss the point. The greatest event ever on earth was the birth of Christ. This brought hope. And tell the whole story. I mean, prophecies that they were being waiting 700 years, like Isaiah, to confirm. I think this is an opportunity to bring to the scene the right person, the man of the hour, that is Jesus Christ.
Amen. You know, I want to jump off one of the things you said there. The whole mythology of Santa today, it's a
perverted.
It's not Christian.
No.
It's really satanic almost, because you have. I mean, think about it carefully here. We're talking about this ancient spirit who watches you when you're sleeping, is always judging you, threatening you. You better watch out, right? You better not cry, you know. And he's going to come and he's going to place his judgment on you, and then. So it's this workspace. If you're worthy, you get a gift from him. If you're not worthy, but then, like you mentioned, the rich kids, he answers all their requests. It's the poor kids who he gives nothing to them. Now, if that doesn't sound like the devil himself, I don't know what does. You know, so there's a concern about that, about the whole mythology of Santa Claus today. Not the real Santa Claus, but the mythology of Santa Claus, the North Pole Santa with his demonic little helpers. These little elves doing his business with him too. Some have questioned if that's slave labor or not. That's another topic. But
we can't have another TV show.
But does that? I mean, not to take the fun out of it, but I mean, and you know, I'm very lighthearted about things. I don't get easily offended. But the constant drumbeat of that theme, does that make the gospel not just suppress it, but contradict it? And I'd like you to reflect upon maybe the theology of Santa versus the cross.
I'll give you a little pushback, and then ultimately I'm going to agree with you. Okay? So
that's Rick. That's Rick being Rick.
That's right. In C.S. Lewis's *Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe*, Father Christmas plays a role. Now, in the land of Narnia, it is sort of the land of imagination or fantasy. You have, you know, all of these satyrs and fauns and all that type of thing. But when Father Christmas appears, he is in service to Aslan, who is the Christ figure of Narnia. So he exists in the fantasy world, but he is so far beneath Aslan. He does Aslan's bidding in work. And so I can imagine, for as much as there are some who grow up and say, I was deceived, there are a lot of people who might look back and say, I have fond memories of being young and have my imagination and thinking these things are true. Well, understanding that all of that, including our imaginations, are a gift from God, ultimately under Christ's lordship and authority, can be valuable. That's why I'm not too harsh and pushing it down. That being said, you have on one hand the birth of Christ, the Savior, and on the other hand, you got this little imagination idea for little kids. It's not equal. I mean, Christmas, we as parents or as churches, I mean, we need to make the emphasis right here. This little thing on the side, even if you do teach it, it should be so much beneath the real celebration that God was in our world, in the flesh. Why? You know, that's the real question, and to save us from our sins. So either way, I think we're in agreement that the strong emphasis, I mean, exponentially, is going to be on the incarnation of Christ in this world. That's what our celebration as Christians should really be about.
Right. Lierte, you want to add to that?
Well, it's the real reason for Christmas, and we can't waste the opportunity. We got to make the use of it. Even though that we're dealing with culture, and culture is strong. You got all the Santa, everything, the decoration, you got all the traditions, all of that, and then you come with the Bible. I mean, that's not a fair game, you know, but presenting Jesus as the gift. He's the real gift of life. I mean, imagine, I think that today, that's the big problem. We kind of, as Christian, we lost that expectation that were in the lives of the Jewish people waiting for the Messiah. You know, we need to rescue that expectation. Take out of the expectation for the gift to be open on December 25th and have back the expectation of, hey, we're celebrating the hope of the world.
Yeah.
Kind of change that and put some value to the real reason to it. Because I think that we get, and this is our fault, we get kind of obfuscated because of the lights, the trees, the season, and we kind of forget, okay, how about the real Christmas, the real deal? And let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
Just something adding to that, it is a spiritual, this thing. I don't know if you guys heard, this was years ago, and this was on Forbes magazine. They were saying that 2 are the biggest seasons that families fights in America. Number 1 is Thanksgiving, and the other one is Christmas. So don't tell me that there's no spiritual thing underneath of it. There is. I mean, I know that a lot of families, they'd only get together on Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe twice a year, but we got to understand that, hey, let's rescue the real reason, and let's celebrate that.
All right, I want to close this section with a question for each of you briefly here. Just summarize very briefly, how did you handle Santa Claus with your children?
Okay.
So start with you, Rick.
Sure. So we never told our kids that Santa exists. But we did tell them, be careful, like don't share that with other kids at school and let other parents handle it themselves. But no, this is kind of an imagination, and they never grew up believing or being taught that, and I don't think they've ever, we make a big deal about Christmas though.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very generous to our kids. We make a big celebration about it. It's a big deal. But we've never told them about Santa Claus, and they never seem to be deprived in any way because of that. But again, we told them, look, not every parent decides to do that, so be cautious. Don't go around school telling everyone, telling all the other kids that there's no Santa. Let their own parents kind of decide on that. So that was good.
I kind of, you know, I saw the face of both of my boys like getting frustrated. Santa doesn't exist, and I made it clear, hey, I paid this bill, okay? I gave you I mean, I was not that kind of bad, but I told them I used this opportunity to talk about the real Santa.
Yeah.
You know, as a believer of Christ. And I just did this with my younger one. He's a first grade, and I think that this is the time at 6, you know, that he needs to get, you know, settle in life to understand that it's no fantasy.
Yeah.
You know, and he took it good, you know, and he was sharing 2 of his friends still believe in Santa. And he was like proud of himself that he's now a new adult at the age of 6, like feeling important. But, you know, that's how I dealt. But it's interesting going back to that Christmas. Everyone has their own experience. And the greatest Christmas of the world, it is in America. But coming from a Latin American country, I never believed in Santa Claus. Yeah. Just because my neighbors, they didn't have the same condition that I had. I remember my father buying gifts and putting at their door. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and I said, okay, so there's no Santa. It was my father. Yeah. You know, and it depends where you come. I mean, go to Hell's Kitchen in New York. Those kids, they are there, you know, struggling if they believe in Santa. You know, it depends on the environment that you're in.
Yep. Great. Good. Well, for us, I think we're very similar page here. It's like we didn't speak ill or good. We just kind of let it, just didn't talk much about it, just kind of let it be. We never made a fuss about it. I think putting heavy emphasis, being part of a church is helpful because you've got a lot of Christmas activities that go on.
Yeah, the nativity and the
family.
story.
So there's plenty to keep him amused in that regard. And then when I think it came up, you're right, I told him the real story of Santa Claus, of St. Nicholas, and I had no interest in indulging it. Part of me was just sort of just ignoring it and not bringing any more light and attention to it, and just letting the world be.
Ho, 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 and let Jesus shine.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on here. Here's a recent one that I don't know if I should just skip it because I'm going to save it to the end. I'm going to go to question number 3 because I think more people are concerned about this one than and that is nativity scenes. Okay. Many Protestants, especially Baptists, take great issue with images being used in worship, especially images of Christ. You come to our church, you go to the Catholic Church, there's statues and images everywhere. In our church, there's none. There's a cross, there's a few symbols, that's it. All right. They would say, there are some who would say that nativity scenes that were representing Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus is a violation of the second commandment. Do not make a graven image. And I want to give you a quote. This is a Baptist pastor in Atlanta. I read his blog. I'm not sure who he is, but he makes a point that I've heard. His name is Josh Boyce. He says that the statue of a crucifix in front of a Roman Catholic church may strike a blow to your conscience. He's speaking obviously not to Catholics, but to Baptists. And rightly so. But how many Christians among us are offended by a bloody image of Jesus on a cross while seemingly unoffended by Jesus being in a cradle? If the second commandment reads, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, would that not likewise include the popular nativity images of Jesus too? So, you can start this one, Lierte. Do nativity scenes, and with them we'll say Christmas pageants, violate the second commandment?
Well, it's interesting, that question, because I had to reinvent myself in the Christmas season when I came to serve as a missionary in North America, because I was taught that violated in South America the Bible, and because it was really related to the system that Roman Catholics believe. However, it's not that I've changed my theology, but when we live in a culture that celebrates art, and we are really willing to reach people with the gospel, we got to make the best use of things that we have in order to tell the story. You see, the contextualization that we have here in New England is totally different, because we are really in a pagan place. And remember when Paul got into Greece and there was the image of the invisible God? Mm-hmm. I see that the picture of that nativity, we live in a culture that celebrates art, and we live in a culture that needs to be communicated about the story. I don't see that as a big deal today.
Okay.
But I used to have a different perspective years ago before I came to the United States. Okay. So that's a little bit of what has changed in me, and especially in a culture that celebrates art.
So come back for a second. So in Brazil, then, you would have never done nativity scenes?
No, I mean, that was pagan. Now, let me tell you, my grandfather, he's a pastor. He visited me, and it was a shock when he saw our church. I said, you're pagan.
Wow.
Because that was not the way that was taught. And I spent some time with him, telling him. He just said, don't post this on Facebook.
Okay.
But, I mean, he was joking. But in a time that people celebrate art, in a pagan contextualization that we're all in, come on. This is revival land in the past. It's not anymore. Yeah. I think we got to make the best use of that to share the message.
Rick, do you have nativity scenes at your church?
We do not. We have in the past.
You have in the past,
but that wasn't necessarily a conscientious decision to not have it, but we have had them in the past, yeah.
And you have no problem with that?
So I would say, I mean, the Puritans here, they're taking a beating today here, I guess. But they would say no images. They would not even allow a cross in worship.
Wow.
Right. Okay. And for those maybe who are watching, listening, they may not understand the fuller picture. So Roman Catholicism, of course, allows for three-dimensional, I don't want to say idols, because they would not call them idols, but images. Greek Orthodox would allow for two-dimensional icons, so an avoidance of the danger of the second commandment of graven images. And most Protestant churches have neither one, with a few minor exceptions like a cross, right? So, but the point behind them all, of course, is that the danger of idolatry, that you begin to look at either the three-dimensional image or an icon and think there's power in the actual substance that's there in front of you. And you can even do that with a cross. If you have a cross in a Protestant church, somebody looks at the cross, prays to the cross, or thinks that if I touch the cross, a certain power emanates, or anything like that. So that's why I think the Puritans and a lot of Protestants are against crucifixes and things like that too. Anything that has a graven image, as John Calvin said, we are master craftsmen of idolatry in our hearts.
Idol-making factories.
We're idol-making factories. We want to worship something. Our sin wants to worship something besides God. If you give it something, there's a temptation. And I think you see that in churches where if there is a statue, that's the word I was really looking for, statue, someone may think, I'm going to pray and talk to the statue. There's power in that statue itself. Now, the question, so really, I guess the question would be, when you put up a nativity scene in your church, is it akin to the cross, where people say, no, it's a reminder, or is it akin to an idol, where people are going to think there's actual power in that? And I think you need to decide that carefully as a church family or as a pastor with your leadership, whether that is a danger. And like Lierte said, in New England, there is a high view of art. So a church that is very plain speaks something, but you could also say it's a very Roman Catholic area. So if you're trying to distinguish from the danger of saying there's power in the actual statues, then you may want to decide not to do it too. So you got to kind of weigh that for your church. So. Yeah.
But I think in that case, I mean, it's not applied to the nativity stuff, because that's just a piece of art. It's not something that people are putting their trust. Now, the cross issue, that is something that even us, Baptists or Protestants, we need to be careful. Any kind of object that we can put our faith on it, I mean, be careful when you go to a trip to Israel. You know, it's Holy Land. Okay, people, you got a holy God. You know what I'm saying? It's like you need to put the balance aspect on that.
So what I think I'm hearing, and I think where I kind of stand on this is, like, we have nativity scenes in our church, but we don't have pictures of Jesus in our church. Though we had at one time at some of these. And for me, it's one of, in no case that I ever thought that the picture or the nativity scenes or any of those things were idols. And I would never say that even in the Catholic churches or the Orthodox churches that these are idols.
They're reproducing the story.
Because they're not worshiping these things. They're just reminding them. My concern is not, because I don't think at all it's a breaking of the second commandment, because it doesn't just say don't make a graven image. It's the full commandment is do not bow down and worship them. It's reference to worship.
It's a bunch of actions. It's a worship scene there.
So what is happening though, but I do have concern about images and statues in that as teaching tools, because they teach things. And when you present a picture of Jesus, you are teaching something about Jesus. So if you see Jesus and he's just got the flowing blonde hair with the gentle look about himself, the blue eyes, that's conveying something about him. Something that is not really accurate either. And there's no portrayal of Jesus that really can capture who he truly is. So there's that danger of just false representations, which is why I've never had a problem with nativity scenes, because babies are babies. They're not interacting. They're not looking at you. They're oftentimes you can't even see the baby in the cradle. It's just Mary and Joseph, everything surrounding him, which is why they've never been troubling for me in any way. But if I've seen even movies about Jesus, which some like the Jesus film that they use on mission fields all the time, I've always just been like, that's not Jesus. It's like it doesn't quite capture him. And so it's a helpful tool, but it can get you into trouble too, because how in the world do you portray the Son of God? How in the world can a picture, a statue, or even a person portray one who is fully God, fully human, in one person, in the flesh? I mean, that's the hard part too. But
and get the wisdom of Paul. He used an image of the invisible God, but he shared the message. You know, I think that it's that opportunity. I mean, if you're about to share Jesus with a person, and there's something there that you can share, why not? But tell the real Jesus. Tell about the story of Jesus can save you. Jesus is like, it's not the image, but if you have something that you can show, especially in a visual community, a visual world that we have, why not? But this is a good debate. And the Puritans, imagine them today. They would consider us what?
Yes, they probably would.
But I hear you making a point that I feel very strongly about too. It's like every opportunity we have to proclaim Jesus Christ and the gospel clearly and boldly, we want to seize upon these moments here. And through a pageant, through a Christmas season, carols and feasts, even through the story of the true St. Nicholas, it's like there are wonderful opportunities there. Rick, do you have any closing comments?
No, I think I agree. Even if someone, because you could debate, was Jesus born on December 25th, right? And there's a lot of people, I think a lot of evidence that maybe he wasn't. But it's a missional opportunity. It's an opportunity for outreach because everyone around us is thinking about Christmas, even non-Christians. And a lot of people are open to conversations about what is Christmas really all about? What do you Christians believe? And I think don't miss that opportunity.
Amen.
You know, don't miss that opportunity.
So,
And another thing, don't take things for granted. Imagine being born in a country that doesn't celebrate Christmas. Imagine in the past, in the old, Soviet Union regime, that there was no Christianity there.
Yeah.
Imagine a winter without Christmas, guys. This is really tough.
It's hard.
I mean, it's really it's dark and cold, and Christmas is just this season that brings light into the darkness.
Right.
And what an opportunity to represent that light. Represent Christ.
So I heard on a different side topic here, you mentioned December 25th being the date. I heard a theory about why that date was chosen. And maybe you can verify they believe that there's sort of a circle of life, that the moment of your conception and the moment of your death meet. And so what they did was they went back and determined that, well, Jesus died in 33 AD on Good Friday, which was at that time, I believe, March 25th. And they said that would have been the moment of his conception. And so add 9 months, so the moment of his birth would be December 25th. That was one of the theories I've heard. I'm not sure if that's fully accurate.
Well, from what I've heard, the date, it was the Romans, that decide, because they had a great feast, the Feast of the Sun. And, when Constantine, he became the emperor, and, God used him. It's controversial, but God used him. And then said, okay, we got this great feast. Let's put Jesus Day. That's what I've heard. But that theory, it makes sense.
So, some different things. So anyway.
That's a mystery.
I've heard that, I've heard that theory
mystery.
in a few places. A few guys that I trust who have not ones to make up stuff reference that as the reason, but they could be mistaken too. All right. Our last question. We've got 10 minutes. This is where we're going to get into it now. All right. This year, this is from a New York Times article. I want to read this to you. This year, church leaders are grappling with what may seem like an odd dilemma. Christmas Day falls on a Sunday for the first time since 2016, and that's a problem. Christmas is considered by most Christians to be the second most significant religious holiday of the year, behind Easter. But most Protestants do not attend church services on Christmas Day when it falls on a weekday. If everyone from the pews to the pulpit would rather stay home, what is a practical house of worship to do? This year, some Protestant churches are deciding to skip Sunday services completely. This has been a trend. It happened, we had the same problem 6 years ago, in 2016, when it fell on a Sunday. Kevin DeYoung, a pastor that we know and appreciated, he wrote a plea to pastors saying, please don't cancel church on Christmas. In response, another pastor, Scott Mell, responded with his own reasons. Pastors, it's okay to cancel Christmas Sunday. So I want to ask you each this question here, and we'll start with Rick this time.
Thank you.
All right. Will
get
you
in
be
trouble first?
Will you be having worship services at your church on Sunday, December 25th this year? And why or why not? So we'll start with that.
Okay. So we're meeting for Christmas Eve service at 7 o'clock, and it'll be a full worship service. We are not meeting on Christmas Sunday morning. So the answer to why is because we're meeting on Christmas Eve. That's our gathered worship service for the week. We're encouraging everyone to attend as the weekly gathered service. We have a high view of the importance of gathered worship. Actually, we believe that gathered worship is not only sacred, it's essential. It's necessary for Christians. We are supposed to meet. That doesn't mean you can never take a week off because you're sick or traveling, but that's a very important part of what we believe. And because we're doing that on Saturday night, we're encouraging people on Sunday to enjoy time with their families, maybe use it as an opportunity to invite whether someone else from the church who doesn't have a place to go, maybe someone else who's not a Christian believer, or you're getting together with extended family, use that as an opportunity for witness. So family worship and an opportunity really to have some conversations about the Lord with other people.
So would you say then, all right, we're not canceling service, we're moving it. We're changing the times.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we do meet for Christmas Eve every year. So, but yes, I think in this particular case, we are we are seeing our Saturday night service as our weekly gathered worship service.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
Are you okay with this?
Well, it's interesting. I will just add something. I'm not okay with just one thing. We're going to add. And maybe you change it. Maybe you do
Feel
it.
free, brother. Say what you'd like. Say what you'd like. Absolutely.
Well, we didn't say we canceled the service the Sunday morning. We just anticipated for, Saturday evening. We're going to celebrate 6 p.m. One of the reasons is getting together with my team, I found out that we're not going to have the whole team available on Sunday morning. And church not one-man show. We need, we have our team, our staff, people that do. That's okay. What we're gonna do about it? We're gonna be strong on Saturday for the Christmas Eve, and then I challenge the church for the Sunday at 1 p.m. I'll be live on Facebook, and I encourage you guys are gonna be with your families. And how about as I deliver the Christmas sermon, you guys will have your family watching it so that we can have our church, not about the buildings, about the people. We can do some evangelism inside of our homes. So that's what we're doing on Sunday. And I said, something? Gather everyone that you can from your family in front of the TV, because now with our cell phones, we can share on TV with the app. And I'm going to preach to your grandchildren. I'm going to preach to your children that maybe they don't come to church, but the church will come to their home. And that's what we're planning, an evangelistic strategy for the Sunday morning.
Interesting.
Okay, that's what we're doing at New Life. But let me just add something. You know that I serve a multicultural church in Framingham. That in the ethnic church, this is what happens. The church plays a very interesting role, because most of the foreigners, they don't have family in the United States. So family becomes the church. I couldn't cancel that Sunday evening service there just because the church is their family.
Yeah.
So we're having an in-person worship service. I'll have a staff there because people are not going to travel to see family, and we're going to do church. I think every pastor needs to have freedom to do whatever the reality he has, and let people just get together. If it's in person, online, or if it's only on Christmas Eve, is okay. Church is not about a gathering place. How about taking this, making this, for some pastor, having Christmas Day on Sunday, it seems like a disaster. Okay, let's try to get the lemons and do some lemonade from it.
Interesting. Yeah, so, all right, so if I could sum up, so you're kind of a half-breed here, Lierte. You're doing Saturday, Christmas Eve.
Well, yeah.
And then, if I got this right, you are meeting with one church in person.
That will be in the evening.
And the other church is going to be in an online service. So
Online.
we'll talk about that church that's online. And they're going to be, is that the one in Georgetown? Okay, so they're
going to be online, and they're going to be meeting with their families,
Okay.
and I'm going to preach a sermon for the families.
So the church will be locked on Sunday morning. Okay, but people will be having service at home. Okay. All right. So for our church, you know me. I'm a little hardcore on this stuff here. I was raised. Sunday morning is the most important part of the week. There was no question. There was nothing else that paled. Everything else paled in comparison to that. And so the idea of I expect that the attendance will be much lower. No question. I expect that.
And maybe the next week too, because New Year's Day will be on a Sunday.
Oh yeah, of course.
Maybe we're going to experience this 2 weeks
yeah.
of low attendance.
But see,
in
this
all of our
is where
churches.
I never saw worship as a means to another end. Like that worship is designed as a means to share the gospel with people, but rather we share the gospel with people to gather them in for worship. Worship is the ultimate, that we do that gathering together as a family, praising our God, praying together in His presence, hearing the Word, all of those things is the ultimate of what we're about. I want to stress, for me, especially in this time and this age that we're in, I always want to stress that really is the case. And as you know, the statistics now, when we were growing up, someone who said they regularly attended church pretty much came almost every week. Now, people who say that they regularly attend church come like once a month. That's the average. So you end up with 80 regular attenders, which means you've got 40 people in your pews on every given week. So times have changed, and I think it's really important. But for us, a point that you made, why I really have put extra importance on Christmas worship on Sunday is, in our context, most of the people who come to our church come alone. They are singles, divorced, widowed, or they're the only Christian in their family. And so to have, that day will be a completely either lonely or completely pagan day for them. And for us, it's like, no, this is really important that we have this gathering together. So yeah, I prefer to be able to sleep in a little bit, but this is really, really important. So for us, again, and that's why I think I want to be slow to judge other churches and say you're in sin, you're doing this. It's not for me to judge anyone. I think your context, which is interesting, you had two different contexts and you're doing differently. And I appreciate what you're doing there, and I especially appreciate it. I would have given you real trouble, but that it's a worship service on Christmas Eve. It's not just a pageant and a concert kind of thing. So I appreciate that. But
and you know, I'm not advocating for not meeting on Sunday.
Yeah.
I'm simply deciding for our congregation this will probably be the best way to do it.
Yeah.
If another church meets on Sunday, I think that's great. So it isn't a I'm trying to be the face of not meeting on Sunday.
Yeah.
I think that's great. The church is meeting. So, but just knowing my congregation, if I had a Sunday morning service, people would come.
Yeah.
And they would make the sacrifices. They're not huge sacrifices, but they make the sacrifices to come.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But I think instead, I'd say just let's have our big gathering on Saturday. Enjoy the time with your family on Sunday. We'll be back together the following week. You know, that's just what I felt like was the best for our congregation.
Okay.
And I think you're being sensible to the reality of your congregation, because, you know, the church for a lot of people, especially people that are by themselves, it's more than a church. It's more than the gathering place. It's where they belong. And I think every pastor, he has his congregation. He's responsible for the congregation that God has given him. Do whatever the Lord leads you to do.
Okay. All right. Well, we got to wrap it up here. I want to thank you again, panel, for a great discussion. That was really enjoyable. Thank you for joining us as well on our final episode of Crossroads for 2022. God willing, we'll be back again in 2023. You can send your letters. Let me know if we should invite these guys again. But we pray.
Do we have the culture of cancellation in Crossroads too?
But may God bless you all. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yes.
Thanks.